unsupervised module coordinator. So hopefully I'll have a few minutes to talk about that before the end of the session. So I thought Maurizio was kind enough to ask me to talk about the dark side of sport as a theme, and obviously doping as one of the most obvious examples, perhaps, where sport can become corrupted for the wrong reasons. So what I thought I'd do is I'd talk through my current understanding of the issues, and then I'd open up to questions. However, please feel free to ask any questions as it's going along. If you don't understand anything, or if there's any examples I'm using that you want a bit more information on, or any questions, please feel free. Okay? So, the subheading I've got is doping or anti-doping, because the question that I want you to think about in the whole, reflecting on the whole situation, is whether or not actually anti-doping is the dark side of sport, which is maybe slightly more controversial. Okay, so what is the dark side? What do we mean by doping being part of problematic issues in sports culture? So you could probably think of more, but this is sort of my initial list of ways in which doping is problematic. So it's unhealthy, it's unethical, it's bad for the image of sport, which can then affect the economics of sport, and also, you know, sport is a role model for young people. It can be linked to corruption and abuse of power at all sorts of levels, whether it's just the level of an athlete working with a coach, or the president of a country telling the laboratory and the coaches and the doctors that they have to organise a proper doping system that all athletes have to take part in. So I just want to think about these first of all. And I guess there's quite a lot of recent imagery that's associated with that perspective. So this is the Russia scandal. So you can see from the headline, drugs and bribery and cover-up. And it really hints that, or it doesn't really hint, it's pretty explicit, that in that particular situation, there was a systematic corruption of sport and abuse of power, right through all different levels of the sporting system. I love this little image because this is a sort of microcosm of the Russia scandal. So this is, I love this because it's just so childlike. It's a diagram of the laboratory in Moscow in which the samples were, athlete samples were taken, stored, analysed, and the ones in which they wanted to swap the samples in order to cover up the positive test were passed through a little hole in the wall to a little shadow laboratory in which they managed to take the lid off the bottle, swap the sample, and then put the lid back on the bottle, post it back through the hole in the wall. And so when WADA investigators appeared, they had the bottles with the urine samples. So, highly organised. If you've got the laboratory doing that, then clearly it's quite corrupt. But I think for me, what really stood out of this Russia scandal was, yes, the politics and yes, the abuse of power. But if you can swap the samples in the bottle, if there's a way of doing that, then the whole system in any country, in any sport, is clearly flawed, right? Yeah? The whole system fails if you can tamper with the bottles. I thought they only had to get one thing right, and they didn't manage to do that. So this is Rodchenko, who is the organiser of the doping system, and his little bottles where he's kind of swapping the samples and doing all that. And this is my favourite person, Lance Armstrong. And the way in which his career has been defined is really about the dark side of sport. Everything about it is about corruption, a film called The Armstrong Lie, so it's like as if his whole career was just a deception. The Race to Truth, again, it's just suggestion that he was lying the whole time and it was up to other people to uncover the truth. People that he bullied are Christophe Basson, French rider, who protested against widespread doping, and Armstrong hassled him so much that he gave up his career. And Emma O'Reilly, who was the physiotherapist for the team, who again he abused. And I think perhaps my favourite sense of corruption is David Armstrong's book, which is called 7 Deadly Sins. So you can't really get any more indication of the sense of evil than to take something from the Bible, which is about the fall of man. I mean, the symbolism is just as big as it gets. But the joke of that book title is that he never mentioned, in the whole of that book, he never mentions any of the 7 Deadly Sins. It's just a nice title for a book to make it sound. I think it perhaps refers to the 7 Tour de France titles that he won, but that doesn't actually make any sense. Because maybe each title is supposed to be a deadly sin, I'm not sure. I don't really understand. Anyway, but the point of the story is, that's the way it's been presented. So let's go back to my list of ways in which doping is the dark side of sport. Okay, so firstly, it's supposed to be unhealthy. Drugs can kill you, steroids can do all sorts of horrible things to you. There's quite a widely repeated story that when EPO first came on the market, 18 or 20 young cyclists died of blood clots or heart attacks or strokes because they were manipulating the blood in ways that were dangerous. So that actual story has been proven to be a myth, but it's quite an enduring myth because people like to believe doping is dangerous. In fact, it's such an enduring myth that in the New York Times about 2 years ago, it wasn't 20 cyclists who were reported to have died, but it was 100. So it's a myth that's kind of grown arms and legs, even though it's not really actually true. So the list of banned substances, though, is not about health. So in the prohibited list, there's 6 categories, I think, but category on anabolic steroids and blood boosters, those 2 categories are the ones which are mostly about health. But the category stimulants can include day-to-day medicines that are not unhealthy. So you can go to a chemist, buy pseudoephedrine to clear your nose if you've got a cold. That's on the banned list. It's clearly not an unhealthy doping product. Diuretics. There's a whole category on the banned list of diuretics. So you take them to wash your urine, clean up your urine sample, and that supposedly covers up the use of steroids. But diuretics in and of themselves are not unhealthy. But if you take a diuretic, but you're not taking steroids, you can still end up with a ban. A nice Norwegian skier called Teresa Jung, I think that's how you pronounce her name, that was given an 18-month ban because she used a lip cream for her cracked lips. Turned out to have a small amount of a steroid in it, but clearly that steroid was there for medicinal purposes and not in order to improve her skiing. Meldonium, you've probably all heard of Sharapova case. Meldonium, widely used drug, probably in Eastern Europe and Russia. It's used the way in which we would kind of use Anodin or something like that. People use it all different age groups. It's not an unhealthy drug. Okay, it was banned because some people thought that it might improve performance by improving your circulation. The other thing about the unhealthiness of doping is that when we compare it to other aspects of sport, then it's probably not actually that unhealthy. So you could go out and play rugby and find yourself with a broken collarbone quite easily. You could go play football and find yourself with a broken ankle quite easily. You could ski down a black run and find yourself tumble turning all the way down a hill. You could crash your Formula 1 motor car. There's lots of ways in which the risk of sport is accepted, but it's part of the entertainment and the competitiveness of sport. but for some reason it's not accepted when it's supposedly related to these unhealthy drugs. So, doping is supposed to be unethical, right? We all agree with that. It's not fair. The person that wins gold has done it clean. The person that wins silver has done it clean, and the person that wins gold has been on a program of steroids and EPO and testosterone, and they've been cheating by swapping their samples in the lab. Yeah, that's unfair, right? Yeah, we're all happy with that. But the problem is, of course, is that there's not really such thing as a level playing field. That we couldn't really say for sure if two athletes would have been the same without the doping. And we also know that really the real advantages that athletes get come from much earlier in their life. They come from having wealthy parents who are interested in sport. They come from living close to sports facilities. They come from having access to the right technology and the right coaches at an early age. There's lots of ways in which sport is not about fairness and about people using their natural advantage for the sake of competition. There's lots of other ways in which people cheat. I don't know how I have to go into that right now, but financially we're going to hear about later. But all sorts of things which are seen as, some of them are quite normal, part of the game, a little bit of gamesmanship, but some other ways of cheating happen all the time. If we come back to Lance Armstrong, then we have to ask this question about if everybody else was using performance-enhancing drugs in the 1990s, which they were, and we know they were, then why is he being singled out as the cheat? There's a fairly profound ethical question, I think, in there, because he himself and quite a few other people like him in different contexts have basically said, I couldn't have competed in that sport in that time period if I hadn't joined in the doping that was happening. My only choice would have been to give up sport, go home, and I had no education, and I had nothing else in my life. I had to do it. And in professional cycling and a handful of other sports, that was a choice that people had to face. So lastly, in terms of ethics, what we've seen quite a lot of recently, and you might have followed the British Cycling and Team Sky affair, is teams and sports in which they push the boundaries of legality so far that it's not really ethical anymore. It's not about level playing field anymore. It's about using what advantage you can possibly get. So the amount of athletes that are using asthma inhalers, because asthma inhalers include stimulant called salbutamol, is highly suspicious. It always has been. It has been since the 1980s. This misuse of the therapeutic use exemption is not illegal, but frankly it's probably unethical. But you need to do that in an organised way. The only people who can do that are people who have the support of sports doctors who are willing to actually corrupt the system. Okay, is doping bad for the image of sport? I'm kind of on the fence on that one. There's not a lot of evidence of people abandoning a sport because of a doping crisis. And almost like the more doping stories there are, the more intrigue and drama, and the more people kind of actually buy the newspapers which are covering the stories. I mean, some of those, David Walsh and a German guy called Hajo Seppelt, kind of made their career actually exposing doping. They've actually made it into a story in itself. So it hasn't reduced the attractiveness of cycling or the Olympics or so on and so forth because there's been doping involved. Now, maybe some of that's the way in which it's framed. So oftentimes there's an apportioning of blame. So you say, oh, it's just a small number of people, and now we've caught them, everything's okay. And I think you can sort of see that a little bit in the Olympics and cycling. Now that we've caught Russia, and we know that Russia are doing that, we've taken Russia out of the Olympics, everything's okay. Everybody else is clean, right? Which obviously is a bit of myth making as well. I think what is the real challenge in all of this is, by definition, where there's a lack of testing. In countries where there's a lack of testing, we don't know if it's doping. So we don't actually know if that affects the image of sport. It probably doesn't, because it's not been exposed. So, but lack of testing is not the same as evidence of doping. So there's a lack of testing in Jamaica in the run-up to the 2012 Olympics. They had quite a few sporting successes. There's a lack of testing in Brazil in the run-up to the 2016 Olympics. And, you know, they did reasonably well. There's been a lack of testing in Kenya, Ethiopia. There's a lack of testing in football. I didn't actually know this until recently, but in the time period that Barcelona, Real Madrid and the Spanish national football team were dominating football, there was no testing in Spanish football. So, the absence of testing is almost like a sort of, it's like a problem is ignored, because in some instances people just don't want to know about it. So the image of sport kind of does change when there's lots of positive tests. People say, oh, that's a success of anti-doping, things are working a bit better. But what people don't know about is where there's secret or hidden doping. So doping is linked to corruption. The Russia case obviously recently, previously East Germany, the USSR. But perhaps the worst of it all, I suppose, is this lack of consent. So in some cases, there's been young athletes given drugs. They didn't know about it, their parents didn't know about it, their personal doctor, family doctor didn't know about it. They had significant changes on their body, and they were not given that choice. So that kind of compulsion, where they're kind of forced to do it, is clearly an abuse of power. But I think part of the sort of image of doping, the way we think about doping, has kind of been influenced, slightly distorted, I would say, by an overemphasis on these sorts of cases. So people often say, well, if we let doping happen, then 10-year-old children will be forced to use steroids just so they can participate in their sport. Because there's some examples of that from East Germany back in the 70s and 80s. So there's this kind of overemphasis on the highly kind of problematic side. So the problem is that not all doping cases are associated with that form of corruption. There's a recent study of all positive tests that have come through the WADA testing system. So WADA collects the testing system from all countries and all sports. So last year there was over 300,000 tests. Of those 300,000, about 2% came back positive. 2%, it's not a lot, really. Of that 2%, probably just under half were inadvertent doping, accidental. People who had used something which they didn't really understand would lead to a doping sanction. They hadn't deliberately done it. They hadn't abused their power to force children to do it. It had been accidental. So our image of doping has been manipulated in a sense to focus on the worst of it, but the reality of doping is much more complicated. And of course, we can't just keep blaming the Eastern Bloc and the USSR and Russia, because Western countries also have a history of doping. And that's pretty well established. Okay, so the last one I have is abuse of power, which I've mentioned already. But in actual fact, the interesting thing that came out of the international athletics and IAAF scandal a couple of years ago was basically that athletes who tested positive were then extorted. They were forced to pay money to have their positive test disappear. Okay? And it's like, well, okay, if that happens in Russia, maybe that's all part of their corruption. And that's fine, and I accept that. But in some cases, the extortion was known by and overseen by the president of the IAAF. So this wasn't really a Russia-only problem. This was an athletics-wide problem. Okay, so being able to force athletes to pay money to save their career is obviously an unintended consequence of anti-doping, but it demonstrates that the abuse of power is not just about the giving of steroids to young people, but it's about other more complicated things. Okay. Any questions so far? Good. So, I'm going to put forward another proposal, which is that maybe the dark side of sport is anti-doping. That the problems associated with doping have been over-exaggerated, and that actually isn't as bad as it seems. But the ongoing problems, which nobody seems to be addressing in any systematic way, are actually associated with the policy. So the policy makes things worse. So, the rule says in the World Anti-Doping Code that an athlete can be tested anywhere at any time. And how would you feel about that? Would you be happy with that? You would? Yeah?
Is that what I said?
You were there
Yeah.
as an athlete. And did you get tested often?
Yeah.
What sport was it?
Golf.
Golf. And you didn't mind that?
No.
Okay. Good, thanks for coming. Okay, so athletes have been persuaded by the authorities to accept this as normal, as illustrated by what's your name?
Thomas.
Thomas highlights the way in which people have been manipulated. I'm only joking. I'm only joking. You have. Okay, but it is presented as a normal part of being an athlete. Okay? If you want clean sport, you have to go along with this. You can't resist it. You can't comment on it publicly because you're seen as undermining anti-doping. Okay? But it doesn't happen in any other walk of life. There is no other job where somebody could knock on your door, come to your house, knock on your door, and basically insist on a urine sample or a blood sample. They could find you when you're on holiday. You're lying next to the pool in Ibiza with your children, and along comes a drug control officer and asks you for a sample. Yeah? That is not normal. It's not normal in any other walk of life. You're never not an athlete. I can understand there's some jobs like an airline pilot or an oil rig worker or whatever where you need to be tested before you start your job. You know, I get that. But you're never not an athlete. It's a 365 days a year, 24 hours a day responsibility. So then what happens is, I won't ask the details on this from yourself, but you're then observed going to the bathroom. Again, would you accept that in your normal course of any other job? Somebody has to follow you to the toilet and watch the urine leave your body. I'm not going to go into any other further descriptions. Okay? But then you have to have a chaperone. So from the point of being notified of the test to the point of giving the test, this drug control officer has to be with you the whole time. That doesn't sound right, does it? So there's quite a lot of cases where people have said, oh, I've just been notified of an out-of-competition test, they've come to my house, I've just been to the bathroom, so they have to stay with me in my house, follow me around the house, I go up to my children's bedroom, they have to come up to my children's bedroom with me, I go to the back garden, or walk the dog, or go speak to the neighbours, they have to be with me until I'm ready to go to the bathroom. That's not right, is it? Surely. That's not normal. And there's quite a few instances where people have been so desperate to get the sample done that they've just drank loads and loads of water until it just hurts. It's just been a painful process. So it's something which is seen as normal, a normal part of sport, but in other walks of life it clearly wouldn't be acceptable. Okay, so then there's the issue of strict liability. So the athlete is solely responsible for anything in their system. Okay, anything in their system, they're responsible regardless of how it got there. So on the face of it, that seems right. I test positive for steroids, it's my responsibility, yeah? I shouldn't be even risking anything. But what if I've tested positive for clenbuterol? Clenbuterol is a form of steroid beta-2 agonist, something or other. I'm not a chemist, that's why I just get through this, muddle my way through the terminology. But the point about clenbuterol is, in some countries it's in the food chain, because they feed it to cattle. So you go to a restaurant, buy a steak in China or Mexico or South Africa, you could end up with clenbuterol in your system. In some cases, there's been an assumption, a straightforward assumption, that clenbuterol positive is a form of guilt. So the Spanish cyclist Alberto Contador got a 2-year ban when he was found to have clenbuterol in the system. However, when the when the Under-18s Football World Cup was held in Mexico a couple of years ago, there was over 100 positive tests for clenbuterol. So they came to the happy conclusion that 100 16 and 17-year-old football players were not doping themselves with clenbuterol, but they'd eaten from the same restaurant and it must be in the food chain. So clenbuterol and the inconsistencies of how clenbuterol cases are managed is a huge problem. So, the problem with inadvertent doping cases, and I could go on and on about them, that's clenbuterol is only one example, is that it punishes the wrong people. You're not punishing someone because they've deliberately doped, you're punishing someone because they've made a mistake. And that to me is actually a crisis. That is a crisis of basic human rights. People should not be treated like that and lose their careers because of a simple mistake. The famous one in Scotland was a skier called Alan Baxter who went to the Salt Lake City Olympics in 2002. He had congested sinus, so he bought the American version of Vicks inhaler, you know, the little tube, little white tube when you unscrew the top and you stick up and breathe it in. So, when he used it in the UK, he had it cleared, it was fine, no problem. He used the American version, it had a substance in it called methamphetamine, which is an isomer of methamphetamine. It's not identified on the list, but it's identified as associated with methamphetamine. So, he won the bronze medal, he was tested positive for that. The panel agreed it was such a small amount it could not have enhanced his performance. He identified the place that he got it from. Happily, they accepted that, but he still lost his medal. And that was the highlight of his career because he never quite fully recovered from that situation. So, contamination, so medicines and contaminated supplements, contaminated food, there's a case of contaminated water, and there's been cases of contaminated kissing. Kissing someone who's taken cocaine can put cocaine in your body. Just to warn you all, just in case that happens. Okay? But in many cases, even a no-fault decision can lead to a sanction. So there's an Italian tennis player, Sara Errani, a few months ago, established that what she tested positive for was from her mother's breast cancer medicine, which had got mixed up in food as the food was being prepared in the kitchen. The panel accepted that. They accepted there was no fault. She still got 2 months. Because of the strict liability rule that she's deemed responsible for anything that ends up in her system. Last I heard on that one, the Italian anti-doping authorities wanted to appeal against the 2 months and make it 2 years. Because they said that she was at fault. So I'm not sure if that one's not been finished yet, but there's lots and lots of cases along these lines. I won't go into the details, but there's also quite a few cases where the laboratories made a mistake and ended up with a false positive. Okay, so the prohibited list is highly complex. As I mentioned already, it includes some drugs that don't enhance performance. Cannabis is another example. But one of the other problems at the moment with the prohibited list is that some substances are allowed out of competition because they're not seen as having a long-term effect. So actually stimulants are allowed out of competition. So if you go to training, oddly enough, you can take as many stimulants as you want. Even cocaine and cannabis and those drugs which you would think would be against the image of sport, they're actually allowed out of competition. So if an elite athlete was walking around smoking a joint, as long as they're not actually in the event itself, that's not against the rules. However, what you've got is some problems of metabolism. So for some of these drugs, they don't understand how long it takes for it to come out of your body. So the cannabis level was set so sensitive in 2003 that you could have passively smoked cannabis, passively inhaled it rather, up to 3 or 4 weeks before the event, and it would still be in your system. And in 2015, WADA finally admitted that and changed the threshold. But they never went back to reinstate the people who had been caught. They basically admitted that they had, for 12 years, made a mistake. So, some stimulants can stay in your body, cocaine can stay in your body. So one of my, in a way this is a sort of tragic case, but it sort of illustrates the point. There was a Welsh rugby player called Sean Cleary. He's an amateur player. He's so amateur, they've never had any anti-doping testing in his club. They've never had any anti-doping education. He's already in his late 20s, early 30s, so he's not like he's on the way up towards something. So he goes out on a Friday night and has a few drinks and a couple of lines of coke, right? But the way he told it was, he thought that was okay because there was no weekend game. He wasn't worried about not, he thought he'd have enough recovery time. There was no weekend game and training was on a Monday. So he turned up to training, and lo and behold, they changed the plans without telling anyone, and they'd arranged a friendly against another low-level team, which never had any testing or any anti-doping education. So he plays for, if I remember correctly, it was such a kind of amateur game. You had rolling subs. They played like 20 minutes in the first half and 10 minutes in the second half, kind of on and off. Anyway, the fact they played was, he ended up getting tested. And I think, it's not really that clear, but my speculation is that they were target testing the other team, because one of the players in the other team got busted for steroids. So they probably knew that other team were coming, and then went after them. So they randomly selected Sean Cleary, and he still had the cocaine in his system from the Friday night, so he gets a 2-year ban from this amateur rugby club, which is going nowhere, for his career in rugby, which is going nowhere. And more than that, I think, is the public humiliation. That he was interviewed in the newspapers in South Wales, explaining what happened, having to admit that he took cocaine, having to apologise to his club and all his teammates, and all of this kind of stuff. And there's just so many cases. That is just only one case, but there's lots and lots in which the functioning of the system is discriminatory. So meldonium, loads of athletes got offered meldonium because they never understood the metabolism rates. The athlete that made the fundamental mistake of admitting it was Maria Sharapova. But Efimova, the swimmer, tested positive 5 times in March and April when it had gone on the ban list on the 1st of January. But she said, I stopped taking it in December, it just happens to still be in my system. And she got offered it. Okay, so I'm not hiding. So perhaps one of the issues is this kind of soft punishment. So once you've been labelled a doper, it's kind of no turning back. That's your reputation, that's what you're always associated with. Alan Baxter is more famous for his Vicks inhaler than for his bronze medal. Lance Armstrong will always be known as the doper, despite the fact, so all these, I don't know if you know this, but his teammates all basically told their story to the FBI and USADA, and they all ended up with 6 months punishment. So Tyler Hamilton, Levi Leipheimer, George Hincapie, and they all came back to the sport. They all started they just resumed their career. either as a competitive cyclist or as a coach or as the organiser of an annual race. So Hincapie and Leifheimer both have these huge races which they organise every year, and everybody's conveniently forgot that they were doping as well. So Armstrong's the one that's been the focal point, other people have got off with it. There's nothing in the anti-doping system that allows for rehabilitation. There's nothing. And there's been 2 or 3 cases where people have killed themselves because they've been so isolated from their current lifestyle and their career and their earning opportunities that they saw themselves not having any other future, and they just gave up on it, gave up on life. So in the criminal justice system, even people who commit murder have the chance to have a counsellor and some sort of work experience that gets them, by the time they're finished prison, that they've got some sort of renewed sense of purpose and come back out into civil society. There's nothing in anti-doping along to support athletes who have a sanction. And it means that their earning opportunities are decreased. So even if they come back after a ban, sponsors tend to not want to be associated with dopers. They tend not to be invited to give, be part of media, TV commentaries on sport. They tend to be generally isolated from the sports community as a whole. So this softer punishment around stigma and reputation and so on is actually massive for some people. It's overwhelming. And that just gets ignored because we're so worried about Russia and all that sort of stuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk for quite so long. I've only got a few more minutes.
Yep.
I think a massive issue in anti-doping, which also isn't really ever discussed, is the fact that it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. It doesn't catch people. It doesn't catch people who cheat. And it doesn't operate in the same way in all countries and all sports. So you're a golfer, you got tested quite a lot, you probably might